there's an arrow next to the chat icon. Click on it. It may say chat settings. And when you click on it, it'll say show or hide chat previews, and make sure that it is toggled to what you want. Two more pieces of housekeeping, as it were. If you are used to using an AI bot on Zoom, we kindly ask you to disable it before asking. We will disable it instead. You are already getting this class for free. You're getting recording for free. You're getting the vocabulary spreadsheet for free. And you can watch this at your leisure, including a transcript created by Zoom itself. So no worries about that. And second, if you are in Israel like I am, your safety is more important than following us live on the recording. If the siren, either the 10-minute advance warning or the immediate siren goes off, please go seek shelter if you're not already in a protected space. We went over that language last week for review. Review is always good, but that is more important than you staying live if it means you are not in a safe space. So please keep that into consideration. If you need to step off, we will still be here. The recording will be here for you if you're not able to join us for the entirety of it. With that, we're going to talk about a topic we've actually already covered, but we were asked to repeat it, which is public transportation. And this was our originally scheduled class for last week, but because of the start of the war, we want to be sure to give you updated information. And so what we're going to do this week is a hybrid of the two. We're going to stick to our schedule, but I'm going to do so in the context of the war, meaning I'm going to give you updated information about public transportation, because there's obviously a lot of questions, not just about how to get around the country, but one of the biggest questions everyone has, tourists, Israelis, Olim, are flights and what's going on with flights in and out of the country. So I'm going to get to as much of that as possible, and more important, how to find out the most updated information with that. So with that, we're going to get started. If you have questions as I'm talking about the topic we're covering, please write in the Q&A. Everything else will go in the chat. I'll review the chat transcript after class. So as always, I'm going to share with you our vocabulary spreadsheet for the day. We're also going to be looking at some other resources with the time that we have remaining. At the top of the hour, I'll take questions and talk to you about Wednesday's class, Cafe Oleh Conversations, where you have the chance to interact with each other in speaking and listening and practicing the topics that we're covering today, as well as next week's class topics. So like I said, we're talking about public transportation. In Hebrew, that's tachbura tziburit. The word for transportation is tachbura. Okay, tachbura. Tachbura comes from the root chet bet resh. Chet bet resh has to do with connection. Lechaber is to connect. A chibur is a connection. So tachbura, connecting you from one place to another. I know that many ulpanim, especially nowadays in Israel, do not cover the issue of shorashim. They'll tell you to look for the shoresh, but they won't tell you the interconnectedness of words. And since we're talking about the root that means to connect, it's always important to connect it back to the root, because the root will give you 50% of the word's meaning. In this case, connection. Right? Transportation in Hebrew is not about transporting you somewhere. It's about connecting you somewhere. That's an important, maybe nuance for you, but an important understanding. And the second word is public, tziburi. Tziburi comes from the word tzibur, public. Okay, tzibur is the public, right? This is the noun, but tziburi is the adjective. We've talked about this before. We have a whole class about this, that you can essentially turn any noun into an adjective in Hebrew by just adding the letter yud at the end, or yud tet if it's feminine, and so forth, right? As opposed to English with all the suffixes we have, isk, esh, hyphen, like, all you have to do is add a yud, and now it's an adjective. So public noun, tzibur, public adjective, tziburi. Okay. Increasingly, when we talk about public transportation, we're also talking about tachbura shitufit, or the idea of kelim shitufim, which are shared, right? From the word leshatef, meshutaf, lehishtatef, shutaf. All these have to do with doing something together, right? We're not going to cover this. When we talk about shared transportation in Hebrew, we're talking about bikes, scooters, and so forth. We're not going to cover that here. We're going to talk about the main means of public transportation in modern Israel. I'm going to leave out one that's a glaring omission, probably for a lot of you who have traveled in Israel, let's say in the last 20 years. I'll explain a little bit why as we get to it, or someone's going to preempt me by asking it in the Q&A. You'll see I will skip over it, but I'll explain why. Okay. But first, before we get into modes of transportation, we need to talk about excuse me, the motions, the verbs that go with travel, right? Because it's important in Hebrew, we don't have one verb that means to go. English has go. First off, go is a very tricky verb. Why? Conjugate go for me. Go, gone, went. Two, three conjugations of the verb that if you don't know the verb, you have to learn that by rote memorization. In Hebrew, we don't have verbs that work like that. Everything has a rule, everything is predictable. Even the things that are quote unquote irregular actually are not. Go, gone, and went. We don't have that in Hebrew, in Hebrew, excuse me. We don't have go, gone, and went in Hebrew, which is great, but we do have multiple verbs that can translate to go. And that's an important distinction we're going to cover right now. First off is the verb lalechet. Lalechet is a verb many of you probably learn beginner's Hebrew. It's a very important verb, and this means to go. This is the overall verb to go because this is also the verb when you want to say he's going to do something. The near future, it's called in grammatical terms, right? I am going to go to sleep in a couple hours, right? The near future. It's not I will go to sleep, I'm going to sleep. So this verb is used a lot, lalechet, right? In the present tense, ani holech, אתה הולך, את הולכת, הוא הולך, היא הולכת, אנחנו הולכים, אתם הולכים, and so forth. אתן הולכות, הן הולכות, הם הולכים. Okay. I'm not going to do the whole conjugation. You have our great resource, pe'alim.com, for that. What I am going to explain is the difference, what we talk about to go. When we use the verb to go, we are only talking about a short distance. Listen very carefully. If you're writing to me in the chat or in the Q&A, please stop and listen very carefully. We only use the verb lalechet for a short distance, regardless of the means by which you travel, but it usually means on foot or on a bike or on a skateboard or anything that's a short distance is lalechet. And when I say short distance, folks, I'm not talking in relative geopolitical terms, how some people say 45 minutes is a short commute in one country and a long commute in another. I mean a short physical distance. So for example, in the sentence in English, I'm going to the grocery store, right? I wrote here I'm walking to further emphasize, we say ani holech baregel la makolet. I put baregel in there to make it clear I'm going on foot. Regel is your leg, but it also stands for on foot to the grocery store. I could say ani holech la makolet, take out the baregel, right? Ani holech la makolet, and substitute that to I'm going, right? And it would be understood it's a short distance. It is in my immediate neighborhood. I am not getting in a car. Bless you all that drive to your grocery store. We're talking about a neighborhood grocery store here. Ani holech lamakolet. Okay, we're going to get to the verb that means a long distance in just a half a second. Okay, but ani holech lamakolet, a short distance. I'm going to the grocery store. Okay. If you want to go a long distance, that verb is linsoa. Okay, this is a long distance, meaning usually in a vehicle, not on foot. It could be international, it could be within the same country, it could even be within the same city if the city is big enough, but it's a long distance. Okay, the important word here is distance. Lalechet, short distance, linsoa, long distance. So for example, when we wish someone in Hebrew, bon voyage, itself not English, of course, when we wish someone a good journey, we say nisiya tova. Right? Nisiya tova, bon voyage. May you have a good trip, a good voyage, right? Because it's understood you're going a long distance. Again, that could be by car, that could be by public transportation, that could be by a plane, all sorts of different means, but a long distance linsoa. And a nosea is a passenger. Okay? Nosea is a passenger. So much so it's a long distance. The word for passenger has to do with traveling a long distance. right? This does get translated as to travel, and I'm going to even put that here. But it's important to understand this also gets translated as to go, right? For example, אני נוסע לירושלים ברכבת. I'm traveling to Jerusalem by train, or as we would say, many of us would say in English, I'm taking the train to Jerusalem. In Hebrew, you don't literally take a train to Jerusalem. Okay? You don't physically take a train. You travel on a train. אני נוסע לירושלים ברכבת. The same way that we would say, I'm taking the train to Jerusalem, also means in Hebrew, I'm more literally, I'm traveling to Jerusalem by train. Okay? Linhog. Linhog is to drive. Okay. We use this primarily for cars. Okay. So, for example, if you're traveling around in Israel, especially on major highways, and there's a car in front of you and sometimes a truck, it'll have a bumper sticker that says, "Ech ani noheg," or "Ech ani noheget." How am I driving? Okay. And Lilkov is to ride, as in not just a horse, but also a bike. Excuse me. Lilkov. So, for example, השביל מיועד לרוכבי אופניים בלבד. I'm a city boy. This is one of the things that irks me more than anything. One of the few things that irks me a lot as a pedestrian is not that there are bike lanes, is watching people walk right into a bike lane when it's clear this is the bike lane. It may not have a sign like this, but it will have some sort of nonverbal logo that indicates this is for bikes, right? This is, in Hebrew, you would say hashvil, the path. Miuad is intended or directed towards. Rochve ofanaim, the riders of bikes, the literal translation, bilvad, only. Okay, rochev ofanaim, a cyclist, a person who rides a bike. Okay, ofanaim is a bike. Okay, a couple more verbs. Litayel. Litayel is to travel, and don't get it confused with linsoa. The way I describe the difference between linsoa, which is to go a long distance, but also to travel, and litayel is linsoa is to get to your destination. Litayel is what you do when you're there. So, for example, God willing, when we can more easily fly from Israel, right? Israelim ohavim linsoa. Israelis love to travel, meaning to go abroad. U litayel, and to hike, and to travel around, and to tour around. Okay? I'm actually going to put the tour as well. Okay, litayel. Litayel is when you get to a destination that you travel to, what you do. That could be urban, that could be rural, that could be hiking, that could be sightseeing. But the moment you're walking around in a new place, that's called litayel. It also means to hike. So, for example, if you're here in Israel, people love to go on a tiyul. Tiyul is the verbal noun of the verb litayel, right? And it often gets translated to a hike because they're going a distance away from where they live and they're walking around. They're visiting the place they go to, often in nature, and they're visiting it by going on a hike. So we often call that a tiyul. Okay. For example, בא לך לטייל הסופש? Do you feel like traveling slash hiking this weekend? חשבתי על טיול בגולן. I thought about a tiyul to the Golan. Tiyul is as much a trip as it is probably some sort of walking around the Golan. Right? When I say tiyul, it usually means getting out of the car and walking around, if not going on an actual hike. And it could be a light hike, it could be a serious hike. The point, though, is you are traveling to get somewhere, and when you're there, that's when you litayel. A couple more verbs. Latus is to fly, as in a vehicle. This is not to fly like a bird. Latus is always in a vehicle. La'an tiltu latus, where do you want to fly to? Lashut means to float or to row. Those of you who are into kayaks and canoes and other forms. And even not surfboards, we use a different verb for that. And lehaflig. Lehaflig is to sail, as in departing by a ship. Okay, we got the verbs down. Let's get to the major modes of transportation. Let's start with one. May not think it's a major mode, but it is one that often trips people up, especially people coming to Israel. This is often the first one they encounter. as opposed to a preferred one we'll get to in a minute. The monit, hamonit. Monit in Hebrew is a taxi cab, whether you call it a taxi, a cab, or a taxi cab. It's one word in Hebrew, monit. Monit comes from the word just a little farther down, monet. Monet is a meter. Okay. And that is the thing that meters how long you go, right? And based on that, you pay a certain fee. So monit is not related to a car or the service it provides, rather the distance in which you go and how you pay for the service. Okay. Monit is a taxi cab. Actually put in the gender as I'm doing this. M, 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 M. Okay. Why do I put license here? When I talk about public transportation, I also want to update you for those of you who haven't been to Israel for a long time or are used to different modes of transportation. In Israel, all legal taxi cabs have to have a rishayon. Rishayon is a license. That's as much your rishayon nehiga, your driver's license, as it is a license to operate a taxi cab. There is no Uber in Israel. Make that abundantly clear to people. There's no Uber, there is no Lyft, there's no Via or any of those other things that are not licensed cab drivers. Again, coming from a city, that is a welcome and important thing to hear that people are actually trained to be Kapsi Nehage Monit. Taxi cab drivers are here in Israel. That doesn't always mean that they know what they're doing, but at least they're licensed and they're held to some accountability, right? Rishayon. There is no such thing as Uber or anything like that. You can order taxi cabs through apps like Get and Yango, but all of those people who are allowed to accept fares are licensed taxi cab drivers. That's hard to say is one long word, right? You know that they are licensed cabs because of the yellow signage on the top of the car as well as on the side. It will say taxi in Hebrew, English, and Arabic. They're usually white cars. They're always white cars, in fact, with a yellow sign on the top. That is a licensed cab. There are no unlicensed cabs in Israel that are legal. There are private car services. That is not a taxi. Make that abundantly clear. Please don't come after me in the comments about that. It's pretty straightforward. There is no Uber in Israel. There is no model of Uber in Israel yet. There are attempts to make it. In the meantime, we have Get, which is a local app. We have Yango, which is actually from Russia. We have a couple others. Okay, but to order a cab, you only can use licensed cabs. Right. When you're in a cab, it's important this word monet because there are two ways to pay for a cab in Israel. One is lefi hamonet, lefi according to hamonet, the meter. Right. The moment you get into a car, you can ask them to put on hamonet, right? And that is calculated where you are, how much distance you go, how much time do you have X amount of passengers, Y amount of baggage, and so forth. Or you can ask for the mechiron. The mechiron is specifically for intercity travel, meaning you're going from one city to another, right? And there is a standardized list of these prices according to the Ministry of Transportation. You can look these up on your own. Okay, that tell you what the mechiron is between two places. For example, there is a mechiron from the airport into the city, whatever city you're coming from, or from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and back. Okay, there's a standardized price, or you can pick the monet. Sometimes it's advantageous to pick the monet because if there's no traffic, you might get to places quicker and thus cheaper than the mechiron. But if there's a lot of traffic, the mechiron sometimes is a good rate. It's worth looking up the mechiron. Okay. In addition to that, the cabs have two levels of a ta'arif. Ta'arif means fare, and it is indeed related to the word tariff. In fact, tariff is related to the word ta'arif, which in turn comes from Arabic. But the idea of a ta'arif is a fare. Right? If the mechiron comes from the word mechil, price, which is a standardized list of prices of intercity travel, ta'arif is what you're actually charged. And this changes primarily on the time of day and day of week, meaning if it's the middle of the night or on Shabbat or a holiday, there's a higher price. And if it's during the day or in certain parts of the day, it's a lower price. Okay? Usually there's only two ta'arifim per city. Okay? Motza is an origin and yad is a destination. Even though you can use the apps like Get in English and it's very convenient to use, you can upload your credit card. It's very easy to use to know what you're going to be looking at, not just on Get, by the way, but any map um, application on your phone. They're going to use the words motza, origin, and ya'ad, destination, right? You plug in your destination, your ya'ad, and that will tell the cab driver where to go. Equally important before I move on here, if you are used to in your country of origin in paying a taxi, especially those that you flag on the street with a credit card, don't expect the same thing here in Israel. Okay. That also includes, by the way, waiting in line when you leave the airport to get a cab. Unless you order it through an app, you're going to have to usually pay by cash. By law, you should be able to pay by credit card. In theory, because of the credit card processing fee, many cab drivers refuse to accept credit cards that aren't through an app. So, for example, I use Get. It's very hard to hail a cab in center Tel Aviv in general. Most of them are already reserved through an app. And through the app, I can also pay with a credit card. I can also toggle the option to pay by cash. Credit card is going to be your friend. Let's move on to some more accessible forms of public transportation. Autobus. That needs to be much bigger. Let me just make that bigger. There we go. The bus, or as we say in Hebrew, autobus. Okay, autobus is a very, very, very popular form of transportation. It has been for a very long time. Um, even before the state of Israel existed. And this one is probably the one you're going to use the most. Okay. Some verbs that come along with it. La'alot. La'alot does mean to make aliyah. It does mean to ascend. It also means to board. This is the verb that you're going to use, by the way, to board a plane and to board a bus, also a train. La'alot. And to alight, meaning to get off the vehicle of your choice in order to get to your station. La'redet. La'redet also means to go down. Okay, to descend. But the fancy word that you'll see often in English on signage here on bus stations is to alight. If you didn't know what that word means, now you know. It means to get off the bus. Litakef. Litakef is a really important verb, folks. Litakef means to validate. It's not about validating your feelings or validating someone's opinion. It's about validating your ticket. It is very important in Israel because you often can get on and off buses and other forms of public transportation without an actual physical check, but it's assumed that you have paid for it. Okay, so litakef is very important. Nowadays in Israel, it's standardized not to pay the bus driver, him or herself, rather to use the onboard mechanisms to pay, which I'll get to in just a second. That also has to get to the word lahatin. Lahatin is as much to top up your various public transportation cards in Israel as well as it is to top up, for example, to charge your phones or other electrical devices. Okay. And finally, lisrok. Lisrok is also going to be important when you are traveling on public transportation, because you will need to scan either a QR code or a device or your credit card in order to pay for a trip. Okay. Our word here, alight, horada bilvad. If you're looking at bus signage, it often says that, especially in intercity travel. Horada bilvad, alight only, meaning that you can only get off on the station. It's not accepting new passengers. What am I talking about with litakef to top to scan all those verbs just now? About 15, 16 years ago, Israel went under a major public transportation overhaul, and you could then pay with something called a Rav-Kav. Up until about 15, 16 years ago, you could only pay individual fees, or you could buy a multi-pass ticket by going to a central bus station or a train station. It wasn't nearly as popular as use then or walk around with a lot of money to buy one of these off the bus. And we're talking about hundreds of shekels. Rav-Kav came around and made the whole system much easier because then it could combine all the different bus systems and travel systems in Israel on one card that eventually, after a couple iterations, you could then pay for by credit card, first in person and then through an app, and now also in stores and various machines around the country, right? And that thing was called the Ravkav. Some of you may still have your Ravkav. It's that I don't even know what color you would call that. It's not even lime green, with a purple figure in the middle. And that card could contain all sorts of various freestanding money called erech tzavul, accrued value, meaning you could just put money on the card, and every time you use public transportation, you um, got your card scanned, it would take money off. You could pre-buy passes to put on it. Okay. It was a very popular thing. And then the next iteration came around, which are the apps that we use today. Ravkav has its own app, which you can still use your card or without the card. But now we have other apps. For example, Move It and Hop On. I'm a big fan of Hop On. That's the one I use because not only can you pay for public transportation and not just the bus, by the way, but the train and the light rail with this, you can also plan a trip with this, right? So it's Google Maps and the payment system included. And as it's written here, it'll automatically tally for you your travel, including if there are any discounts available based on how long you've traveled. I'll get to that in a second. There are two other apps called Pango and Cello, which also double as parking apps. So if you need to pay a parking fee, for example, you can also use these apps if you're also a driver. But Move It and Hop On are great. They're also both in English. Highly recommend using these if you can use it, especially those of you coming abroad. For a while, you weren't able to use it if you didn't have an Israeli phone number. If you can figure out how to use it, it's a really great service because, again, it's built in. Um, uh, Transit times. It gives you a planner as well as when the next bus, train, or light rail is coming and allows you to pay. For those of you who are 75 and up, you might still need a card because we call this the Zahav Kav. If the Rav Kav was that green colored thing that everyone had, Zahav Kav allows you to ride public transportation for free. Okay. All this information, by the way, is available in English, and covered this in the past. So please look at our previous lessons on public transportation. I don't want to go into it too much here. What I do want to cover are very important parts when I talk about Move It and Hop On, and this discounts are automatically tallied because in Israel, just like in other places, you are given certain discounts. Some of them are based on your age or where you're coming from in the country or what your status is, if you're a soldier, if you're a student, if you're a senior citizen, if you live in certain areas, but also based on how frequently you travel. So, for example, in many places in Israel, you travel within an hour and a half free. So, if I need to transfer between bus lines here in Tel Aviv, for example, I have an hour and a half from when I first get on the first bus and pay my ticket to get onto another line, and I don't have to pay an extra 8 shekel. That's a big deal, right? We would call that a nisiya bodedet or chad pami. Nisiya bodedet, a lone ride, but chad pami means one time, right? Disposable is often how it's used in the context of things like, for example, plates and cups that are disposable. Chad pami, one-time use. Okay, well, one-time ride is a nisiya bodedet. I can use that to then, by the way, within that hour and a half usual grace period, travel on to other ones. The one I use the most is a chofshi yomi. Chofshi means free, not free as in free, no cost, but free as in freedom. And yomi, daily, from the word yom. Remember what I just said before about when you put a yod at the end of a word, it turns into an adjective. Yom is a day. When I add a yod to it, it becomes an adjective, daily. Very efficient, right? Chofshi Yomi means the following thing. Let's say I live in Tel Aviv. I have a meeting at Nefesh B'Nefesh's office in Jerusalem. To get there, I have to take, when it's a normal time of the year, I have to take the light rail to the train to either walk or bus to their state, to their office, and then this whole thing back. When I do that, my app, as long as I pay through the app, will calculate for me automatically, are there any discounts traveling between Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim? And there is. When you travel in a certain zone and every in the country is blocked into color zones based on how many kilometers I've gone, it calculates it, and then I'm not charged any more than that chofshi yomi. meaning that there is a daily rate of travel for 24 hours between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem based on that distance, that I won't be charged any more than that, which is great for me because by the time I've taken the light rail and the train, and usually one more piece of public transportation, I've paid for that day pass. That Chofshi Yomi is fully paid for. So it's really worth using the app instead of every time buying a Nisiya Bodedet. Okay? Not only because I'm paying by credit card, but it's automatically calculating for me so that when I go to pay, for example, my trip back on the train, it's no longer however much it is, 13, 16, 17, 18 shekel, whatever it is. It's now 8 shekel, or maybe it's 0 shekel, and even tell me what it is because I've already gotten to the top of that day pass. It's a well worth looking into. Again, we've covered this in the past. Okay. That's also, by the way, there's a Chofshi Chodshi. If you travel on the same line every day, for example, for work, a monthly pass used to have to buy in advance. Now it's automatically calculated if you use one of those apps. And a Chofshi Outsi, if you travel a long distance on a regular basis, it's worth looking into that. Right? Two other pieces of buses before, actually, before I get to the buses, an update on the buses. Buses schedule since the start of the war has been impacted. They are coming back. They aren't necessarily at the full capacity that they used to be in terms of frequency, but there are more and more buses coming on to a regular schedule. There are changes depending on where you are in the country, so it's important to also look at the map. If you use Google Maps or if you use one of the apps with the built-in trip planner to tell you the frequency of buses. In addition to that, here in the center of the country, and we're going to get to a very special case shortly, we have two forms of free transportation, particularly on Shabbat and holidays. One is called sababus, and the other is called na'im besofash. Sababus comes from the word sababa, slang for great, awesome, plus bus. And na'im besofash is a play on the word pleasant, which is na'im, but also lanua is to move. So pleasant on the weekend or moving on the weekend. Both of these are free services paid for by the municipalities that sponsor it. They travel throughout Shabbat and holidays, sometimes also in the middle of the night, typically to places that are very popular that you would otherwise need a car to go. That isn't just places of entertainment here in Tel Aviv, the beach, and so forth. That's also, by the way, to major hospitals. What if you need to go visit a sick relative on Shabbat and you don't have a car and you don't have the money for a cab? This is one of the solutions it was built to do. It's now expanded, I believe, all the way to Mevaseret Zion, which is just outside of Jerusalem. But it started in Tel Aviv, Naim Basofash. Sababus was the rival. So here in the center of Tel Aviv, you have both services. Both of these have maps. I've showed it to you before in the past. Another great incentive to look at our previous lessons. Okay. The next bunch of words we're not going to go through now. They're actually going to be for our conversations on Wednesday, but these all have to do with various things that you're going to hear on the bus, from an inspector to asking directions to getting off the bus and all sorts of other things like that. We're going to cover that on Wednesday. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit in a preview for Wednesday. I want to get to some other words before that. First off, very popular form of travel in Israel, Rakevet and Rakevet Kala. The Rakevet is the train, and the Rakevet Kala, literally the light or easy train, is the light rail. Okay? Rakevet, as in Rakevet Israel, Israel Railways, right, goes from all the way in the north to Nahariya and all the way in the south to Dimona and Yerucham. Okay? The Rakevet, as of now, is currently operating, albeit at diminished capacity. There is meant to be at least one train per hour for 24 hours, including in the middle of the night for the two major rail lines in Israel, which is from Beersheba in the south up to Nahariya in the north, and from Jerusalem to Netanya or Herzliya. Okay, those are running. You will be guaranteed at least one train per hour on those two lines for 24 hours, every hour and 24-hour cycle. So even in the middle of the night, there will be a train coming to and from the airport, for example. Very important for some people. Okay, rakevet is a very popular form of travel. It's um, nice, easy, convenient for those of you who have a station near you, and we'll get to that word in a second. And rakevet kala, right? Right now, it's in Jerusalem. There's a rakevet kala, and in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, there's a rakevet kala, both of which are being expanded. When we're talking about updates in the form of the war, these are also important to get into. The Rakevet, as in the Rakevet Israel, is operating. The Rakevet Kala in Jerusalem is still operating. I believe it's every 10 minutes, from 5 in the morning, I think, till 10 at night. The Rakevet Kala here in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area is not in operation. It is not in operation. Several of the underground stations in Tel Aviv and in neighboring Ramat Gan are built to be bomb shelters, and they are being used as that. Here in Tel Aviv, it's all the underground stations except for Kalibach are being used as underground bomb shelters. In Ramat Gan, I forget off the top of my head, but the Rakevet Kala in Tel Aviv is not in operation. The one in Jerusalem is. Okay. Important words to know when you're traveling on either the Rakevet or Rakevet Kala. Tachana is a station. Ratzif is a platform. And Tadiot, we've been talking about this throughout. What is the frequency of public transportation? Is frequency, right? How often something comes. Okay. The big one, the big one that's affecting a lot of us right now, and I'm going to get through as much as I can and maybe have time for a few questions at the top of the hour before telling you about our session group and the next week's class. First off is the word matos. Matos is an airplane. Okay. Matos is an airplane. Um, okay, and a tisa is a flight. We talked about latus is to fly as in a vehicle, matos is an airplane, and tisa is a flight. You can even hear it in those three words, folks. Latus, matos, tisa. They both have, all three of them have the same root. Okay, important to know roots because at least understand the connection between words. Obviously, in this case, to fly, an airplane, and a flight. Okay, to take off is lehamri, as in hamraot are departures. If you're looking at the Ben Gurion website or increasingly the airport in the south, Namal Tufa Ramon or Namal Tufa Haifa, which also offers international flights, right? You want to see if you're looking for departures, it's called hamraot. And to land, linchot gives us the word nechitot, arrivals, right? Departures, hamraot, nechitot, arrivals. Okay. Hamraot, departures, comes from to take off, and linchot, nechitot, arrivals, comes from to land. Okay. Some other important words here. Dalpak or delpek, depending on who you're talking to, but it's usually pronounced dalpak by Israelis. The check-in desk. Biduk bituchoni, security check. Usually before you're allowed to check into your flight, you have to go through a security check in Israel. Bikoet dalkonim, passport control. Those of you coming from abroad and don't have Israeli passports typically have to see someone in person in order to be allowed entry into the country, whereas Israelis can use one of the automated machines where they scan their passport and get a pass that they then scan. Meches, customs. Sha'ar is a gate. Sha'ar is as much a gate 4,000 years ago in the Bible as it is the word for a gate today, as in the airport. A word that unfortunately we've grown accustomed to in the last 2.5 years is a tisat chilutz. Tisa is a flight, chilutz is rescue. So a tisat chilutz is a rescue flight, meaning, as you saw in the first days of the war and that are still going on right now, Israelis who are stranded abroad, who didn't plan on being away for longer, often can try to get on a tisat chilutz from one of the Israeli airliners, which will bring them back to Israel either for the same fee that they already paid or for a nominal fee. Likewise, important words to know, nidcha is postponed, mevutal, canceled, bituach nesiot, travel insurance, polisa, insurance policy, dmei bitul, cancellation fee. We're going to use all these words in Wednesday's conversation class. Before Wednesday's class, those of you who are already registered will get a series of conversation prompts that will use this language so that you'll be able to practice it in real time with each other and with me. Highly recommend joining us if you haven't before, whether you're registered or not. It's entirely free, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Two more pieces of information, three more pieces before I stop and answer questions. Number one, I talked about last week, we have a special case in Israel of one city that has a very unique transportation system. And it's not Jerusalem and it's not Tel Aviv, it is Haifa. Haifa has always had its own unique vibe. Those of you who've traveled there, who've been there, who maybe even lived there for a while will attest to that, right? But they have their own transportation systems. In addition to the train, in addition to buses, they have three unique things for them. One is called the Rakavlit. I've yet to do this. Is the Rakavlit, which is their gondola. Okay. Remember that Haifa is built on the slopes of Hara Carmel on Carmel Mountain. So to get up the hill, you have a number of different ways to do that. One of them is through the Rakavlit, the gondola. Okay. That is what it's called in Haifa, the Rakavlit. As of now, since the start of the war, it is not in operation, but typically it takes about 15 minutes from the bottom to the top to get on the Rakavlit, and that is part of public transportation. Okay? It's individual gondola units. I know people who commute and live and work in Haifa, and they love it. It's a great way, especially those who work at the university at the top of the hill to get to and from. The Metronit. The Metronit is a bus rapid transit system. If you are unfamiliar with that term, think of it as a combination of dedicated bus lanes and more frequent buses. Okay, so it's a bus, it's a lane in the road that only buses can travel on, and they're more frequent. Usually there are different types of buses that sit closer to the ground. Okay, but that system is called Metronit that also operates on Shabbat because of Haifa's demographics of being both Arab and Jewish. They have transportation on Shabbat there. And then finally, one of the signature modes of public transportation in Haifa is the Carmelit. The Carmelit is a funicular rail. If you don't know what a funicular rail line is, it basically goes up and down the side of a mountain on a single track. It's very popular in other parts of the country, in the world rather. Carmelit is a unique one. People often call it the first subway in Israel. It's not quite a subway, but they're not so far away from it. The Carmelit, by the way, is also in operation during the war, and the stations operate as public bomb shelters. So you can both travel and seek shelter at the same time, which is a great combination during this period. Two resources I want to share with you and then get to as many questions as I can to keep abreast of what's happening. These are in Hebrew, but it's great to practice the Hebrew because a lot of the vocabulary we just went over is included in these words. So first off, if I can get my keyboard to work. Oop, doesn't want to operate. Let's do it this way. First off, let's do a in the news, right? Because obviously transportation affects a lot of people. So understanding what is working and what's not is obviously incredibly important for all of us. So for example, this is an article from Mako, which is one of the major news outlets in Israel, and it talks about all the different forms of transportation and what their current status is, right? So it tells you התחבורה הציבורית, we had that at the beginning, right? Public transportation, מתרחבת, is expanding. 60% מהפעילות הסדירה החל מיום ראשון. 60% of the regular operations starting from the Sunday after this was written. Okay, very important. Sorry, just 1 second. See if I can get that word to work now. There we go. Okay, so it then goes through this article, and we'll share this link with you in the YouTube recording. It goes through every major public transportation company in Israel. Dan is the major bus company here in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Superbus is usually in the Sharon, so north of Tel Aviv. Egged is nationwide. It's both primarily in Jerusalem, but also within cities in Israel. Electra Afikim is also very popular in the south, right? So those are all bus companies. Okay. Rakevet Israel, Israel Railways, telling you about the new um, plan system. Again, we've gone through all this information, but I want to share with you how it's covered in the news. Harakevet Hakala B'Yerushalayim, the light rail of Jerusalem versus the light rail in Tel Aviv, right? All these things we talked about already. So again, looking at the news, using the vocabulary we have will get you the best updated information. And then finally, a great website called Passport News, which is primarily about traveling abroad. And here they're covering obviously all the flight cancellations and everything going along with that. So I'll share with you, for example, where it has the latest information, right? We'll share with you this website as well. What does it say here? Um, בשורה לנוסעים, מכסת המושבים בטיסות היוצאות מישראל תגדל, right? Good news for passengers, right? We had that word nosea, nosim is the plural. Good news for passengers. The amount of seats on outgoing flights, tisot yotzot, leaving, departing flights from Israel will increase. Okay, and so what is it telling you? It's telling you that um, מכסת הנוסעים היוצאים במטוסים רחבי גוף ל-300 ובמטוסים צרי גוף מ-100 לכ-150 עד 170 נוסעים. What is it saying? That as of now, there is a cap on how many passengers can get on a plane out of Israel. And shortly in the coming days, that's going to increase. For wide body planes, it's going to go up to 300 passengers, which is usually the entirety of the plane. And for narrow body flights, typically to Europe, will go from 100 to 150 to 170 passengers, meaning that flights will be at much higher capacity to take full flights out. Okay, so this is also telling you not just about that, but it will also give you updates on individual airlines and what their current status is, right? So for many of us, as we approach, for example, Pesach, and we had flights or planned flights to and from Israel. That's going to be important. Or understanding when the skies are open. The news is very much on top of that. So when we understand public transportation, it's also understanding how much the war impacts it because public transportation, as opposed to where some of you may come from, is an integral part of Israeli life. Not all Israelis have private cars in Israel. Many have to use public transportation because that's their only option. And even then, it's not always the best option. Right. So that's why it's such an important topic to go over, because in Israel, you will invariably use much more public transportation, maybe even more than where you're from. I only have time for a few questions, but I want to remind you that first off, this class will be recorded and put up on YouTube in the next day or so. Wednesday, we're going to take this topic. And turn to conversation points. So not only talking about getting on and off a bus and getting directions, but more importantly, flights. How do I find out if my flight is canceled or not? How do I get money back on my flight? Are there upcoming flights to and from Israel? All those things, real-time information, folks, that people are going through right now in Israel, you're going to be able to participate in through our conversations on Wednesday, where we break you out into groups based on your current proficiency. You get the conversation prompts in advance, so at least you can practice, and then practice with each other and with me Wednesday, 7 p.m. Israel time. Highly recommend joining us. Very relevant Hebrew for sure. Before I get to Q&A, because we only have a few minutes left, I want to let you know that next week's class, God willing, things will be quieter. We're going to stick as much as possible to our original planning schedule. Next week, we were going to start talking about Pesach, right? Passover, the big holiday that's coming up, the biggest of the holidays, I think, of them all, by virtue of how much we talk about and how much we plan for it. So next week is going to be part one of two classes on Pesach, where we talk about all the preparations that are going on even now, as people are trying to figure out what they're going to do for Pesach in light of the war, all the different preparations that happen in a regular year, and again, what's happening right now, so you can be the best informed, whether you're here in Israel, you planned to be in Israel, you have relatives or loved ones here, all the things you need to know about Pesach in Israel next week. With that, a few minutes for Q&A. Um, A bus driver mocked me in front of the whole bus for asking "Ata olech larachov?" Was it bad if it was a short distance? You're right, because what you're asking the person is, are your bus driver, are you going to such and such street? Which in English, I totally get. In Hebrew, though, it sounds like, are you personally the driver, not the bus, the driver going to it? Instead, you want to say, and that's going to be included in the vocabulary sheet. We just didn't go over it. Ha'otobus magia lerachov. Does the bus arrive to such and such street? That's the way you're going to say it because it's not the bus driver arriving there, it's the bus arriving to the station that you want to get to or the street that you want to get to. Okay. That is included in our vocabulary. We just didn't go over today. Great question. Um, would you use linhog or lilkov for riding a motorcycle or an e-bike? Lilkov. Linhog is for a car. But for a motorcycle, a scooter, a bicycle, it's going to be lilkov. Great question. Is there a way of saying one is traveling to go hiking so it's clear? Ani yoseh hike. You can always say, just use the English. Ani yoseh hike. I'm doing a hike. Okay. But letayel is also a great verb for that. Okay. I see a lot of people asking about the vocabulary sheet, which means that you're brand new here and welcome, especially new people. You will get the vocabulary spreadsheet we shared. It will be in the description of this lesson when it gets uploaded to YouTube in the next day. Um, what is the custom in Israel regarding tips for taxi drivers? Great. When you use get, it will have an option for a tip. It is not customary to tip cab drivers. In fact, if you try to pay in cash, which many people still do for cab drivers, they will often refuse tips. It is not customary to tip a cab driver in Israel unless they go out of your way to do something helpful, like bringing your luggage, especially if you have a lot and you're traveling by yourself. It is not customary. What about paying with bit for taxis? That is currently not an option. Usually you are paying by credit card through an app or cash in hand. Um, I'm not familiar with the term to top up. What does that mean? To top up I know, is a more British English thing than an American English thing. If you have a card that you can add value to, for example, a Ravkav in Israel, right? You're given the card and it has nothing on it. I want to add, let's say, 100 shekel to use in the next week or so, or 2 weeks or so, when I take various forms of transportation. I'm not really paying attention if it's the bus or the train or the light rail, whatever. I have 100 shekel on this card. So every time I use the card, it deducts from that 100 shekel. If I want to add more money to it, that's called topping up. Why are certain buses a light only? Do you know the theory behind it? Yeah, it's pretty simple, especially for intercity buses. For example, if you are traveling between Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim and you take the bus, those of you who still do, I highly recommend taking the train, but this is one of the reasons you would take the bus. If you take the bus either from Arlozorov or the central bus station, it will stop at the bridge at Mevaseret Zion. Mevaseret Zion is a town right before getting into the city limits of Jerusalem. And you will see it has on the sign a light only, Horada Bilvad, for those intercity buses. Meaning, if you're coming from Mivaseret Zion and you want to get to Jerusalem, right? There are lots of local lines that do that. But if you're coming from Tel Aviv and you need to get to Mevaseret Zion, you can get off there, and that's it. Because I don't need to take a bus that's potentially packed with people coming from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to take local fares, right? Because it's considered local if you're coming from that short of a distance. It's at most a 10-minute ride, right? Also because intercity buses are typically express. They want you to get to one place to another as quickly as possible and not take a lot of local fares, of a lot of local stops, right? They don't want to stop very often to pick up new passengers, just to drop off. So if it says Horada Bilvad, it means that it's coming from a long distance. We just want to get these passengers to where they go, not pick up new ones. Um, what's the difference between get and hop on? Get is only for taxi cabs. Get is only for taxi cabs. Hop on is for other forms of public transportation, the bus, the train, the light rail, and all the Haifa public transportation systems. Get is only for taxi cabs. Great question. People are correcting me that Zahav Kav dropped to 67 plus as of 2025. So you are welcome into that. That's a great service. Instead of 75 plus, it's now 67. That's a huge boon for many people. Kav does not mean card. Kav means a line, not a line that you wait in. A line is in a bus line or a train line, right? The line in which you travel that the bus goes is called a kav. So, for example, if I'm going to Tel Aviv University from where I live, I can take a couple different kavim. Kavim lines, meaning bus numbers. So, for example, because of all the construction on the Rakevet Kala, on the light rail in Tel Aviv, I can take Kav 25. Kav 25, bus 25, or bus number 25, we would say in English, but in Hebrew we say Kav, the line of the bus number, but it means line, and then the number itself. Okay. Um, what happens if you're on the bus or in a taxi and there's a siren? So we covered this last week, but I'll cover it again because it's very important to remember, right? If you are on a bus within a city, like here in Tel Aviv, and the siren goes off, the bus driver will pull off, will stop, pull off to the side, and you are to seek shelter in a building nearby or in a public shelter nearby. So if you're by an apartment building, usually the door will be open. You go down into their miklat. If you're by an office building, into their building's miklat. If you are on an intercity bus, meaning you are traveling, for example, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the siren goes off, the bus will pull to the side and you are asked in your seat to duck with your hands over your head. Okay? In a taxi is the same thing as in a bus, meaning that you're in a private car. If you're in the city, it will pull to the side and you will both seek shelter. If you're on a highway and in a taxi and the siren goes off, it will pull to the side and you will both get down on the ground and cover your head with your hands. How is this put in the trunk? Can I put this in the trunk? That's in a vocabulary sheet. You'll see it when you get the link to it in the next day. With that, unfortunately, I do need to go. If you have any urgent questions in the Q&A that I didn't get to, feel free to write to us, hebrew@mbn.org.il. But like I said, this lesson will be uploaded, excuse me, along with the vocabulary sheet and links to those two articles on YouTube in the next day or two. Wednesday, we're going to cover all the other things we didn't cover in that spreadsheet, plus important conversations to talk about flight cancellations and flight planning and trip planning in general. Until then, I hope to see you on Wednesday, if not next week, to start talking about Pesach. And as we talked about last week, we wish each other, especially in these days, besorot tovot. May we only have good news. Until then, toda rabah and litraot. Take care.